Hello, I'm Sari Reyes, and welcome to the premiere episode of Sorry Not Sorry. This is an informational and entertaining podcast. We'll be talking about the psychology of the brain, the workings of the adolescent life, personal development, and current events. So stay tuned. Episodes will come out bi-weekly every Thursday. Make sure to check out our Instagram and TikTok pages for more similar content. Let us begin. For today's episode, I'd like to talk about what's kind of going on in the teenage mind and what we all need to develop in our brains as teenagers. So Dr. B. Bradford Brown labels the 4 tasks adolescents must accomplish as, number 1, standing out, number 2, fitting in, number 3, measuring up, and number 4, taking hold. These 4 tasks we all need to achieve to fully develop our brain and our individuality. So number 1 is standing out. Not in terms of standing out from a crowd, but in terms of discerning oneself from authority. Up to this point, a lot of our lives have been controlled by our parents, adult decisions, and we kind of haven't had the freedom to do as much as we'd want to do. During these formative years of adolescence, we find that it's important to separate ourselves from authority, from our parents, to find a clear sense of who we are as a person. This can oftentimes cause what society would deem as teenage rebellion, but really it's just us finding our individuality through decisions that may not be quote unquote the best. Movies throughout the beginning of time have framed teenage years as anxiety, hormonal, and just years of being lost, but at the end of the day, the risk must be taken in the name of development. This first goal of standing out is meant to figure out who you are and form your identity. This can be linked to gender, ethnicity, and social orientation, culture, and their family. A lot of influences during this time can cause us to make decisions that we may regret in the future, but are still very formative in our identity. This is when teens form a relationship with themselves and when they develop their own autonomy. Autonomy is the capacity to make informed, uncoerced decisions and act independently according to one's own values, rather than being controlled by external forces. Your autonomy is formed all throughout your adolescent years, from stage 1 to stage forever, because you are always trying to figure out who you are as a person, even throughout the rest of your life, and especially in your adolescence. The adolescent brain is going to want you to fit in. Yes, you will want autonomy to justify seemingly harsh decisions, but in the end of the day, everybody still feels the pressure to be liked by everyone else, to be part of the crowd. They want to be different enough to be an individual, but not individual enough to be different. This is a part of the cognitive and biological processes that affect adolescents' behavior, based on external forces, romantic relationships, and troubled households. This is the part of the cognitive and biological processes that affect adolescents' behavior based on external factors, romantic relationships, and troubled households. This is when external influences begin to form your identity as a person. We all have times where we want to be a different person, and a lot of the time, our decisions and our thoughts are based off of what other people want from us and external influences. The third psychological task that we need to overcome is to measure up. They want to fit into teenage standards and the people around them, but they also want to fit the pressures of society and the pressures instilled in them from a young age. I would say that this is a huge part of high school and the college admissions process. I find that a lot of people I know get very burnt out by the idea of having to apply to college and do as many extracurriculars as you possibly can, get the highest grades, do all the jobs. From a young age, it's instilled in us that we need to be successful, that we want to try our best to be the best, and that sometimes trying our best isn't good enough, but we still need to be the best. And this is kind of heightened during your adolescent years when all of the morals that have been instilled in you from a young age of wanting to be successful but still be a good person, work hard, are formed into our identity. I know a lot of people who have had identity crises, and go from being the smartest and the best to thinking that they're not the smartest and the best because of the high standards that they put themselves to. On top of all that, they want the capacity to engage effectively in social relationships and to be accepted into their desired peer groups. We're very cliquey during this age, and this is because we're really just looking for a support system that's going to understand us the way that we want to be comprehended. During this time is when we figure out our social competence, and social competence is necessary because it develops your impulse control and your emotion regulation, especially in social situations. Developing social competence is the act of understanding and interpreting social interactions. A lot of social anxiety develops during this age time because of social competence and a lack of developing such a skill. The skill of communication is truly important and does age you throughout your years. The fourth and final psychological task that you need to overcome in your adolescence is to take hold. Psychological tasks encourage risk rather than discourage it. And a lot of people talk about the prefrontal cortex and the limbic brain and how the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, so we end up making rather rash decisions, and same with the limbic brain. In order to develop the prefrontal cortex and the limbic brain, yes, there's a physical side to it of being healthy and not stressing out as much, getting enough sleep. But really, the prefrontal cortex develops as your brain recognizes risk and reward. The key tasks challenge an individual to explore their possible identities, and they require new skills and require a level of risk-taking in order to reap the reward. To take hold refers to making commitments to particular goals, activities, and beliefs. This is when your individual forms your true moral beliefs and discerns what you want versus what the external influences around you want. So you really figure out who you are, what you want, and what you want to do. I think those are the two main questions of adolescence are who am I and what do I want to do with who I am? I think this is when it's super important to have that level of curiosity and openness to figure out what you want to do later in your life, what you want to do with your time, and the best ways of doing it. I know that I get really anxious when it comes to thinking about the future and thinking about what can come ahead, but you need to remind yourself that we're all on a journey, and the journey has no end set goal or blueprint. It's really just your own choose your own adventure. I wanted to talk a little bit about normative scripts. Normative scripts are a socially constructed, often subconscious template for behavior that dictates what is considered normal or desirable. It's essentially the external influences that prove to be a subconscious voice in the back of your head telling you what to do and what not to do in terms of societal regards. This reinforces group norms. Normative scripts can create a social value assessment that favor in-group behaviors. This is the whole idea of mob mentality, and this is why teenagers are so cliquey, is because they can't form their own true individual thoughts without feeling that they are going to get judged, and so they just conform to whatever is going on around them. They conform to the normative script. So, in conclusion, if you are a teenager and you are struggling with finding out who you are as a person and truly digging into your individuality, think about the 4 tasks that we must accomplish to form our individuality. And that is standing out and developing an identity and pursuing autonomy, fitting in or finding comfortable affiliations and gaining acceptance from your peers while still maintaining your autonomy, measuring up, which is developing competence and finding ways to achieve, maintaining your autonomy, and taking hold, which is making commitments to particular goals, activities, and beliefs while maintaining and forming your autonomy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Sorry Not Sorry. This is the interview segment. Today we're here with local lawyer Corey Martin. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. I'm Corey Martin. I actually have a firm in Hingham. I'm a commercial litigator, and we do various real estate, property law, small business advising. But I'm here today because I've been doing some work on the side for kind of immigration rights and constitutional rights. So that's kind of more why we thought we would have a conversation, I think.
Very
So would you say you've always had a particular interest in immigration justice?
So I think my overarching interest tends to be like human rights or justice for kind of ensuring, I think always I've had this strong sense of inalienable rights that no one can take away and no one should. And I think as I've gotten older, that's become more reinforced with this idea of so many of our problems stem from the fact that we create hierarchies rather than really committing to the concept that every human being is equal. And so I think that's what motivates me into getting into certain issues. And I think immigration, the area kind of always, and particularly right now, highlights these issues because we do not, I think we kind of create a false narrative between citizens and non-citizens, and we lose focus on how we're all human and what should be guaranteed for each human being. And so that's, I think, why immigration tends to be an area that I've done a fair amount of pro bono work in. But the overarching kind of concept that I always want to push is this idea that,
We're all human.
yeah, and that these like constitutional rights we speak of are rights that are kind of beyond any piece of paper. You know, they have to be, the piece of paper is there to remind us that no one gets to determine them or take them away. They're just inherent in us being able to live our one life, you know? That, but anyways.
That message has been kind of lost recently,
Yes, I agree.
but we're so happy you're doing this work. So did you always want to go into law for that reason?
I think I did. I kind of had I thought maybe politics too. But yes, I think even in high school, I kind of thought eventually I'd do law school and that sort of thing. And so I did end up going to law school later, but I think it's been hard because, you know, then there were periods of time after law school that I felt like, oh, maybe this wasn't the right path. And there are so many areas of law where you're not necessarily, I felt like, fulfilling this idea of ensuring equal right. You know, you can kind of end up in a sphere where you're somewhat assisting and reinforcing kind of
Whatever
capitalistic
your party.
norms or whatever, because you help support like businesses do what they need to do and their objectives and this sort of thing, or even in any area, your client is who you're representing, and not always are the client's objectives or the client's job or the client's things the most altruistic of endeavors, right? So I think it's been a little bit of an indirect road of kind of finding my place and being able to kind of still adhere to kind of the original goal of wanting to pursue like justice, I guess, like this idea of kind of making sure that the law propels in the right direction, rather than just feeling like you're a lawyer that kind of helps to reinforce what's already existing, you know?
So you're paving your own path. And that's super
in my
important.
40s, right? Like, keep going.
No, yes,
Never
always.
stops. So,
Well, you recently were featured in the Boston Globe for your workers case. Am I saying-
Yunuska is the mom's name, right? Yunuska
Yes.
and Maria. Yeah.
You visited the Dilley Immigration Processing Center in Texas, and you were able to free them from the detention center, yes?
Yes, they were released. So that was a big one because I was very nervous it wasn't going to happen. It's interesting how much keeps changing. Things change
With the
fast.
justice system?
Yeah, and just like how even this current administration like handles things, or you know, so at the beginning of February, it was way more unclear like how you could figure out ways to get them released because there was a position, and there still is, but that when you're pursuing a case under a certain statute, that it's mandatory to be detained during the proceedings until the case is determined. And so this is a change in interpretation from before, and is a big reason why we're seeing so many people that have no criminal record, that have been here for a while, that have been doing things like as was asked, being detained, because they're now interpreting something that already existed statutorily, but they're changing the interpretation to mean that during the pendency of the case, while they're determining the case of asylum, and there's a few other procedural ways it could happen too, but that's the main one, that you have to be detained during that time. So that's why they were detained. during a routine check-in, Yanuska and her daughter were detained and sent to Dilley. For them, that wasn't as far there from the Austin area. For some people, it's across the country. Dilley is one of the only detention centers right now that detains children. And so as a result, most children and with their parents are being sent to the Dilley Detention Center.
As opposed to like a jail?
So there are detention centers throughout the country. There are contracts with local jails. So, for example, the Plymouth House of Corrections in Plymouth does allow ICE to detain people at the Plymouth House of Corrections. So there are some people being held there that are in ICE custody for whatever reason. Most detention centers will be either focused on for women or men. There's some, so I was in the Carnes Detention Center, that's in Carnes, Texas. They detained both women and men, but adults only. And they're usually kept separate. But yes, it's a lot of times it's like warehouses that they turn into facilities that feel very prison-like, and they do set up parameters. It is more or less a prison, but a lot of them are not necessarily prisons that existed for the state, because prisons are run by the states rather than there are federal prisons too. I don't know if actually how many federal prisons would house ICE detainees if they don't have jurisdiction over them for federal crimes. I'm not sure if they have it. I don't hear of that often, actually. But states have their own prisons that are independent from the federal government that can create a contract with the federal government to house people.
Continue.
So yeah, the private companies, a lot of times they outfit it. So I think they turn the warehouses or whatever into a facility that can detain people. And that's what Dilley is. So Dilley was never a prison in another way, but it operates on the same model. So they've turned basically trailers, multiple trailers, connected them in like the desert and created this kind of like prison area. And then a little bit down the road, there is a Texas prison. So anyways, it's a miserable place.
I read the article, and I remember it mentioning that she wouldn't eat and she was having panic attacks in the detention center.
Yeah, so a lot of the kids end up going to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist, like, I think recently a psychiatrist there was maybe going to prescribe antidepressants to like a 4-year-old. And
Oh my gosh.
right, because they're showing signs of depressions, but it's a normal response, honestly. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I don't want to get into but to a situation that's not meant for children, right? Like they shouldn't be in a prison. So it's reasonable that they're reacting negatively to such a negative environment. But you know, I think they try to pitch it. It probably is nicer than some of the other detention centers, right? But the model is a prison. It's to take everything away from them. It's to control everything they do. They're on camera all the time. They're watched and guarded all the time. There's guards that stay in the room at night when they're sleeping, and they leave the lights on. They never turn the lights out. So they sleep kind of like in light like this. So none of the kids are sleeping, which I think is like borderline torture. So
I think that's abuse.
yeah,
yes.
it's full on abuse. And so the kids don't sleep well ever. That's one of the major problems that I'm seeing is the lack of, and we've learned, like I just, as a parent now, like the research I'm diving into to learn about best care for my kids, they're just saying more and more how important sleep is in the formative years, that they just desperately need that sleep time and good sleep because it's when their brain is forming and like developing, and they're not getting it, you know, because they just can't sleep well. There's really uncomfortable mattresses. They're thin. And in the wintertime, it was cold. I don't think the coldness is as bad anymore because outside it's like 100 degrees. But Yanuska and Maria complained a lot that it was just so cold that it was uncomfortable for sleeping. And Maria had asthma, so she was getting sick. The last day I saw her, she was pretty sick. And it took her about a week and a half to recover. She ended up getting pneumonia and having to be treated when she
What would you say influenced you to take on this case?
So honestly, like this type of work I find incredibly rewarding, and also just just natural. Like it keeps going, right? You know, I want to keep going. It just kind of feels like it's exactly what I would want to spend all my time doing, right? But in terms of wanting to go deal with Dilly, I think my experience seemed to make a lot of sense to focus on Dilly detention. So I knew that they were starting to pitch petition in federal courts for habeas. And recently I got barred in federal courts. I had been doing more work in that, so I felt more comfortable in that space. About 2 years ago, I was doing asylum claims pro bono, so I was barred, or not barred, I don't think that's the right term, but like registered, because the immigration courts are an executive agency type thing under that umbrella. And so it's kind of a separate system. So I was part of the immigration court system. I had a number I could already represent in that sphere. And that's nationally. So I could go and represent them in Texas without having to go through that process again, and was a little more familiar with the process. Now, I wasn't an immigration attorney, so definitely I still have, areas where I need to learn more. But I've also done criminal law, so I've dealt with issues of detention and the arguments kind of dealing with due process for detention and the reasons that the government can claim to justify detaining people. So like kind of am familiar with that sort of argument. I think more and more I have been feeling like this is an area that I really want to target, which is the erosion of the clauses in the Constitution that protect against arbitrary detention. And I think it's actually decades in the making, and it's why we've seen mass incarceration. It's why we've seen and it all overlaps. And so I thought Dilly was a good example of where we've ended up, where it's difficult to release children from indefinite detention. Our Constitution is not working, I don't think, when that's the case. Like when we have to try to pitch child by child to the federal courts, like they shouldn't be allowed to detain them. And the fact that they kind of argue back and forth about it is just insane to me. Like, to me, it should just be like point blank, of course not. This is shut down. This is done. It should not be allowed whatsoever.
It's a breach of their natural rights.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it's unnecessary. You think about, if you go back to like 1776. But if you do, I just think growing up in this area, they were like obsessed with teaching us the Revolutionary
Natural
War
rights,
and
yes.
Boston and the Tea Party and all that, because we're right here, right?
Yes.
It's our backyard. And so they love to kind of bring up the idea of arbitrary, the whole point was they didn't want tyranny, right? They didn't want someone dictating their lives because they wanted that there was no reason for it. It had nothing to do with them. It had everything to do with this king and whatever the heck he wanted to do on any given day. And all the money raised would go to what he wanted and for him. And the whole point of the experiment, that they started off with a good concept, which they failed to execute from day one, right? I mean, they're compromising on slavery and that. It was a mar that they still haven't remedied, but they still had a good concept of this idea that all men are created equal, right?
Yes.
And it should be all people. And so this concept, so much of the language in the Constitution was to prevent from tyranny and arbitrary, punishment. And that, I don't think I totally understood the idea of how it could be totally arbitrary until now. and how we've allowed it to get to the point that the government really is deciding to detain these people because they want to. There's no other reason. They can try to pretend there's a reason, or say like, oh, it's because, honestly, with the Dilly thing, they're saying it's because the law says they have to. That's what they're saying. That's their justification.
But the law also says that it wants to protect all people. So it's very contradictory.
Well, that's the thing. The statute should be unconstitutional, in my opinion. If the statute means that they have to be detained indefinitely for no legitimate reason, then it should be unconstitutional, right? That should be a violation of due process. I think it should justify cruel and unusual punishment.
Yes.
I think it should justify it violating excessive bail. We have a clause that says no excessive bail. What happened to that, right?
Do they have a bail
They
fee?
don't even have bail because in 1976, I think it was, we have to go back. I have to double check the year, but go back and read the Supreme Court case from Salerno, is the case name. That is when a lot of things changed, but they interpreted the clause excessive bail in that case. And what they decided was it doesn't say you can't have a statute that says no bail. So the Constitution says you can't do excessive bail. But they interpret it so that you could do no bail, meaning that you don't have the option of bail.
Of bail, yes.
There's a lot of that happening that's become kind of like my passion project. I want to change. I want to connect all the dots of how all of these things are happening, all because we have eroded the constitutional protections against arbitrary government power, and particularly the ability of the government to detain indefinitely.
So would you say that this political climate has motivated you to make a change?
Yes, I think it's been there for a while, but I do think I've woken up even more so in the last few years. I think what has really floored me is just how there always used to be pretext that I could at least buy in a little bit to justification for international wars or what have you. And maybe I should have never bought into them the way that I did, or kind of listened with as much confidence to what was said, to believe what they were saying and that there was some sincerity in their arguments. But now they don't even bother with the pretext. And yet the law is still kind of supporting them to do these things. And I'm like, okay, well then this is ridiculous. This is not working. Because, more and more it's been clear that the idea that they shape the law, like that if you're elected and you have a mandate, you get to determine the law and how it's interpreted. And that's really dangerous because sure, you're elected by the public, that you get to decide certain policies, but there should be an underlying, there's still supposed to be the norms that you're not allowed to change, that those aren't up for debate. You're not mandated to change whether or not women can vote. You know what I mean? Like that's done.
That was the agreement, yes.
You get to decide how much money goes to what have you. But
yes.
This idea that a mandate allows you to just kind of totally throw out everything because you've decided now that you're smarter and better and know better, that's not a democracy. That's just not. So I've been noticing that happening more. I think, the way that coverage has happened and what they've spoken about of what's happening in Israel and Palestine, that has just, gutted me. And so, yeah, I'm more disillusioned, I guess, than I've ever been. But I also have always believed the idea that you can keep fighting for it to be better, because the inherent truth is that we're all real. We're all on this earth. The ocean's still there. The trees still grow. The seasons still happen. So, maybe they don't want this. Maybe it's going to be bad for 10, 20 years. But, it's still worth putting out there that they're wrong. That we should all be. Yeah,
yes.
exactly. Yeah.
Do you think propaganda has
I think we're propagandized every day of our lives, and it's hard to sort through that. And
That's true.
it's impacted me, and I think the best skill you can do as a young person is strengthening your critical thinking.
Yes,
I mean,
discern what you believe is.
yeah, it's
Right
so
now.
important. I mean, I think one of the exercises you can do, read any executive order that comes out of the White House. The language sounds pretty. And a lot of times if you read the words, you're like, okay, that's not bad, you know?
Yes.
And then you just have to really pick it apart and be like, what does this actually mean? Like,
The
how
underlying
far could
meanings.
this spread? You know, who could this apply to? And then you start noticing, oh, okay, well, this actually could be used pretty.
Dangerously.
Right. Yeah.
So what would you say is your next plan of action regarding raising awareness towards these situations? What's your next step?
So so this kind of took off in terms of like finding more families that I could represent, finding other attorneys, doctors, other nonprofit organizations that are great and I want to work with. So like I really want to jump into this as much of my ability as I can. So I'm starting a nonprofit to be able to continue doing that. I'm going to start raising money so that I can, because I've been doing it all pro bono. So I want to keep it that way so that anyone who reaches out to me doesn't have to pay anything. And to do that, I will have to start kind of fundraising so that I can almost like pay myself for legal services, that sort of thing. So that I'm doing and I have in the works. And I would say it now, but I haven't totally finalized everything. So hopefully soon. But yeah, so I mean, it's been so busy. I'm getting calls from Dilly almost every day looking for representation. So,
Well, I think the work that you're doing is super important and very needed during these times. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and for sharing your thoughts and your message.
yes. Happy to come back anytime.
Thank you so much.
We can do like a generational podcast, the old person and the younger person.
Okay.
P.S. If you'd like to learn more about Corey's work in immigration justice or find ways to help the cause, check out Corey's website at heldtruthsproject.org. Thank you so much for tuning into Sorry Not Sorry's premiere episode with special guest attorney Corey Martin. Make sure to follow Sorry Not Sorry on Instagram and TikTok, and I hope to see you next Thursday. Bye!